Chapter 14. Breaking the Siege. After many days beneath the mountains, Errol and Eadril finally returned to the outside world. Their mission was to return to Arjan to arrange transport of the first batch of weapons the dwarves had nearly completed. The walk to Edgewood was a pleasant one. Winter's bitter chill still appeared to be far off. The golden leaves of the forest were slowly turning to silver, but unlike common trees, they never fell from the branches. Instead, they hung in splendor year-round, merely transforming their beauty into another shade. Errol had never grown tired of the changing of the leaves. Each time he saw the glorious transformation, he was overcome with awe. Though Eadril was equally appreciative of the beauty of the season, his face became etched with concern as they entered Edgewood. "What is the matter?" Errol asked, noting the discontent on his friend's face. "The town looks so deserted," Eadril replied. "I have a strange feeling that something is wrong." Seeking an explanation for such desertion, Eadril went to the Goldleaf Inn to talk with his friend Brundle. The establishment was completely empty, far from the case over a week earlier, according to the innkeeper. Just over a week ago, this place was filled with people, Brundle informed the Teluvian warriors. They were all heading north. Fleeing Teluvia, they were. "Fleeing Teluvia," Errol exclaimed. A grave look came over Eadril's face. "It seems Diax's fears were realized," he said. "The Ursals have invaded the forest." "Indeed, they have," the innkeeper continued. "I have heard that the royal city itself is under siege." Brundle's words struck Errol with horror. "Surely someone has come to their rescue," the worried young elf gasped. "It did not seem to be the case at first," Brundle said. "Everyone was running away. No one seemed to want to stay and fight. Sadly, the few soldiers we had were crushed at Norfolk in the early hours of the war. I must say, things were looking quite bleak." "What do you mean?" "War," Eadril asked. "Well, things were looking pretty hopeless until a man stopped the people who were heading north and rallied them together right outside my inn," Brundle explained. "He was a bold fellow indeed. The crowd was very bitter towards him at first, but he won them over. His speech was very moving. If I was not such a meek fellow, I would have marched into battle right along with him." "Who is this man?" Eadril asked. "Why, he was that friend of yours, Diax's. I believe his name is," Brundle replied. "So they saved Arjan?" Errol asked eagerly, hoping that the worst was over and his home was now safe. "Actually, they did not head for the royal city at all," Brundle recalled. "They all left town, heading due south, towards Telesway. As far as I know, Arjan is still surrounded. I have no idea where your friend planned on going or what he was going to do. All I know is that I have yet to see a single Ursal soldier in these parts, so he must be doing something right." "What do you suppose Diaxis is doing?" Errol asked Eadril. "Attempting to muster as many soldiers together as possible, I imagine," Eadril answered. "What should we do?" Errol asked. "We need to return to Marchon and ask another favor of the dwarves," Eadril said. Great fears occupied Errol's mind as he and Eadril made their way back to the mountain. The beauty of the forest no longer held his attention. Thoughts of the possible death of his family and the destruction of his home loomed darkly in his mind. The travelers left the open air of the outside world behind them and returned to the torchlit depths of the mountain. Eadril wasted no time in putting the question of military aid to Doran. The dwarf king was greatly sympathetic to the plight of the elves, but he was hesitant to send his people out on such an expedition. However, Eadril presented a most convincing case, playing on the king's sense of sympathy as well as obligation. It did not take much pleading to convince Doran to help the elves. Realizing the extent of the danger facing the Teluvians and the fact that they had done so much to help him, Doran gave his consent to send an army to help the forest dwellers. By nightfall of the following day, Eadril and the dwarf army were positioned close to Arjan. They were careful to distance themselves far enough away to remain undetected by the Ursals. Eadril himself ventured much closer to get a better look at the state of the city. Climbing a tree near the clearing on which the city was built, Eadril saw the sad fate of the home of his elven friends. Surrounding the unfortunate elves was a multitude of Urkai's finest soldiers, with only the alabaster walls of the city separating the two. Though the gate was still intact, Eadril did not expect it to hold much longer. The Teluvian knight returned to the camp with news of what he had seen. Errol took solace in the fact that the city had not yet fallen. But it was clear the small army of dwarves was incapable of breaking the siege, even with any help that remained within the city. Eadril would have to come up with another plan to defeat the Ursals. The next morning, Eadril resumed his watch from the location he had taken the previous day. The hours dragged on as he observed the Ursal army, searching for a weakness to exploit. An occasional spray of arrows came from the city walls, keeping the Ursals at bay. However, that token show of force was about all the Teluvians could muster. Early that evening, there was some activity in the Ursal camp that drew Eadril's attention. A group of 3 horsemen rode in from the southwest, apparently coming from Norfolk. The Ursal commander appeared to be distressed by the news they brought, and immediately convened a meeting of his captains. Eadril returned to the dwarf camp that evening and relayed what he witnessed. "I think Dyaxis is trying to retake Norfolk," he said. "My guess is that the messengers I saw were seeking reinforcements. I will return to my observation spot early in the morning to see what develops." When Eadril returned early the following morning to resume his vigil, he came upon a scene of Ursal soldiers breaking camp. More than half the army set off for Norfolk. It was the opportunity for which he had been hoping. He quickly returned to the camp to tell the good news to the others. "It is as I thought. Dyaxis is attempting to retake Norfolk," Eadril announced. More than half of the army surrounding the city set off in the direction of Norfolk. "So how many does that leave behind?" asked Thordak, the black-bearded commander of the dwarf army. "Enough to give us a decent chance," Eadril answered. To minimize casualties, Eadril devised a plan to trick the Ursals. It would require a decoy, someone to draw the attention of the soldiers. Errol volunteered for the job. Eadril was apprehensive about letting the prince engage in such a dangerous undertaking, but it was clear he was the best choice. No one in the group was quicker or more agile than the young elf. Errol's task was a simple one. All he had to do was make himself seen by the Ursals. Once he accomplished that, he merely had to run back into the forest, where the others would be waiting to ambush the soldiers. Errol set off on his mission immediately. Upon reaching the clearing, he crouched behind the trunk of a massive oak to survey the situation. The peripheral guard of the Ursal army was positioned not far from where he was hiding. His heart raced as he looked upon the men who sought to conquer his homeland. He dreaded the thought of falling into their clutches. Taking a deep breath, he left the cover of the trees and stepped out into the open. To get the soldiers' attention, he threw a rock in their direction. The stone struck an Ursal knight in the side of the head. His angry eyes scanned the trees and fixed on Errol. "Get that brat and bring him to me," the knight growled. Without hesitation, 4 soldiers ran after the elven prince. Errol ran as fast as his feet would take him, at the same time looking back to make sure his pursuers stayed on his trail. Unfortunately, as he glanced behind him, he failed to see a fallen branch in his path. His foot struck the obstacle, causing the rest of his body to tumble forward. With the footsteps of the Ursals echoing in his ears, Errol sprung to his feet. But as he tried to run, he felt a sharp pain in his foot. He was only able to hobble a few steps before falling down again. His eyes widened with fear as he watched the soldiers close in on him. Realizing that he could no longer run, and that he had no weapon with which to defend himself, Errol closed his eyes and braced himself for the worst. He prayed that Eadril and the others would come to his rescue. His prayers were answered as the dwarf army sprung out of the trees and attacked the Ursals before they could lay a hand on the fallen prince. The surprised soldiers did not stand a chance against the fierce dwarf warriors. Within a matter of seconds, the skirmish was over. Thordak smiled in approval as he looked over the scene of victory. "Now that is my kind of battle," the dwarf remarked, "quick and easy." He then looked over at Errol and said, "You did a good job, my brave young friend. I like the way you pretended to be injured to draw them closer to you." I am afraid I was not pretending, Errol grimaced as he clutched his swollen ankle. Here, let me have a look at it, Eadril said as he knelt beside the prince. His face wrinkled in concern as his hands traced the injured area. It is sprained badly. You will have to stay here while we march to Argion. I will leave a few soldiers behind to look after you. There was no argument, as Errol realized that he was in no condition to fight. Though he regretted not being able to take part in the battle to free Argion, he took some comfort in the knowledge that he had already carried out a crucial part of the mission. It was now up to Eadril to complete the second part of the plan. Having dressed himself in the uniform of one of the fallen Ursal soldiers, Eadril returned to the clearing. Acting as if he had just come from a heated battle, the Toluvian warrior approached one of the Ursal commanders. Where are the others? The knight asked. They are dead, Eadril replied, panting, as if he had just been engaged in a fierce fight. What happened? Who killed them? The knight asked frantically. Surely, that lad you were chasing could not have done it. He was a decoy, Eadril explained. We followed him right into a trap. There must have been at least 50 elves in the forest, maybe more. Eadril's report greatly troubled the knight. He motioned to the other officers and spoke. There is a pocket of resistance in the woods. I want 4 companies sent to investigate. Keep your guard up. They have already killed 3 men. The Ursals obeyed their commander's orders and marched into the forest, following Eadril's lead. Only about 50 soldiers remained in the Ursal camp outside the city. The Ursal knight watched as his men walked off into the woods, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them. Elves, the knight scoffed. They fight like a bunch of children playing with arrows. I do not know why they bother to fight at all. They are only making things harder for themselves. The Ursal knight continued to watch the forest, expecting to see his men return with news of a smashing victory at any moment. What he saw was something entirely different. Out from the trees raced the dwarf army. Their swords and axes were stained with Ursal blood, and their eyes revealed that they were ready for more. The Ursal officer's jaw dropped as he saw the mountain folk rush at him. He ordered a counterattack, but it was too late. Urkai's army had been taken completely by surprise and fell before the furious onslaught of the dwarves. Cheers roared from the walls of Argion as its defenders gathered to watch the fall of the Ursal army. The royal city was free. The siege was over. Errol arrived just in time to see the gates of Argion swing open. Though he had not been there to take part in the battle, the prince was able to join in on the celebration. Errol and Eadril, along with their allies from the mountain, were greeted warmly by the people of Argion. Eadril, however, was not content to bask in the sudden fame he had acquired. Somewhere in the forest, Dyaxes and the others were fighting. At least that is what he assumed. Any help that Eadril and the dwarf army could offer would no doubt be appreciated by the Toluvian commander. Eadril provided the king with a quick explanation of recent events, but time did not allow for much elaboration. It would be up to Errol to divulge the details to his father. The young prince's inability to walk without aid made it impossible for him to complain about being left behind. However, it did not stop him from wishing he could go. So it was without Errol that Eadril set off with the dwarves and a handful of elven warriors towards Norfolk. They avoided the main roads and sent scouts ahead, hoping to catch any remaining Ursal battalions by surprise. But it was they who were caught by surprise upon reaching Norfolk. Only a ragtag group of Ursal soldiers remained in what had been the first Toluvian city to fall to the enemy. Eadril's army easily subdued the soldiers, who seemed to have had their fill of fighting. The captured soldiers spoke of what they believed was a large elven army massed in the woods west of the city. Eadril assumed they were referring to Dyaxes. The knight, along with a small armed escort, set off to bring tidings of victory to the Toluvian commander. Having secured both the royal city and the strategic port of Norfolk, it was obvious that the Ursals had been defeated. Eadril walked down the western road unmolested. But in the trees, unseen by the knight, were the archers of Alcadia. It was not until he heard a familiar voice calling from the branches above him that Eadril knew he was being watched. Eadril. What a pleasant surprise it is seeing you here, Arlen shouted. I must say it is a relief to see you as well, Yeadril replied. I thought you were supposed to be with Doran, in the mountains, Dial said. He had just come down from the branches above. When I learned of the invasion, I figured you could use some help, Yeadril explained. Where is Diaxes? I wish to tell him the good news. The war is over. The war is over? Arlen echoed in disbelief. Yes, Yeadril answered. Argion and Norfolk are free. I figured Diaxes would be eager to hear the details. I am sure he would, Dialis agreed, but he is not here. Not here? Yeadril asked in disbelief. But I thought he was with you. No, Arlen said. He left the two of us behind to help the Alcadians guard the West Road. The commander headed west with King Tamark to invade Ursulus. The two knights provided Yeadril with a brief yet thorough summary of all that had taken place from the time they left Marchand up until their reunion. It was decided that there was nothing left to be done. Diaxes and his army were somewhere to the west. It would have been too difficult to find them to provide any help. Besides, someone needed to protect Teluvia in case the Ursuls mounted another attack. All they could do was return to Argion and hope for the safe return of their commander and those with him. Days after the siege was lifted, a new enemy descended upon the city. Its weapons were driving winds and bitter cold. The vicious storm battered the forest for 3 straight days. Dawn came on the 4th day, and with it, more favorable weather. The storm had passed, leaving only a cool dampness in the air. As the city guards looked out over the frost-covered surroundings, they noticed movement in the forest to the west. At first, they drew their weapons, fearing another Ursul attack. But as the army came into view, their dark-cloaked leader was immediately recognized. Commander Diaxes has returned, the guards shouted. A mob of people rushed to the city gates to greet the army. As the familiar faces were accounted for, the worrying came to an end. Now, the true celebration could finally begin. Though the young knights suddenly found themselves to be even greater heroes than they had been prior to departing on their mission, they were far too tired to enjoy the attention. It had been a long while since they had slept in their own beds. Sleep was the only reward they desired. For them, the party would begin after a long, quiet rest. By evening, the warriors were feeling much more refreshed. There was a great feast and much storytelling, as those left behind longed to hear the tales of battle. The king listened attentively as each warrior told the story of the war from his own point of view. Each account provided a unique perspective of what happened. Every warrior had something interesting to say, but the exploits that drew the most curiosity were those of Prince Ectheon. Eluthian was greatly impressed by his son's leadership, and, most of all, the shooting ability that sent Urkai to his grave. The next morning, Ectheon showed Tamark around the royal city. The young king was very taken by the beauty of the elven city. This is a wonderful place, Tamark remarked. I once thought that Ildor was the most beautiful place in the world, but it pales in comparison to the majesty of Argion. It is said that once you live here, you are never truly happy anywhere else, Ectheon said. I guess that explains why I was so terribly homesick while I was away. Although, I would not mind visiting Ursus again, on more pleasant terms, of course. You could come back with me and stay for a while, Tamark offered. You are very popular there now. The people all think of you as a hero. It would give us a chance to better understand each other's culture. And on our way back, we can stop at Ildor. I have received word from Sarah that the last of Orkai's loyalists have been defeated there. I have decided to make Alcadia a sovereign nation free from Ursul control. I expect the people will choose Sarah as their queen. I am certain that she would want you there for her coronation. It is very kind of you to ask me, the prince said. I would be honored to go with you. However, it was not a longing to see Ursus again that compelled Ectheon to accept the king's invitation. Traveling with Tamark would allow him to see Sarah again. Ectheon hoped that this time he would get to know her better. He planned to do all he could to gain favor in her eyes.